Hello and welcome to Tech Deals Build Time. We are building the Ryzen 5 1600X RGB gaming computer. Now, I've previously done a giveaway announcement on this machine. It will be given away September 30th, 2017. But I want to talk about the parts really briefly that are going in here before we skip to the build part, which will be later in this video. This build is focused on being the premier 1080p gaming machine. We have got the Ryzen 5 1600X processor, 4 GHz out of the box, overclockable using our liquid cooler and B350 boards. This processor could easily last you 5 years. Awesome performance. ASUS Republic of Gamers Strix RX 570 graphics card. That will play all current games in 2017 at 1080p at high detail very well. We have 16 gigabytes of system RAM, which will also play all current games without any problem whatsoever. We have an NVMe 128 gig solid state boot drive for wicked fast boot performance and Windows load time. 3 terabytes of hard drive space, plenty of room to load dozens of the latest large massive games and have tons of fun. 450 watt 80 plus bronze power supply, all the power you need to run this system. And then the mid-tower Cooler Master MasterBox Lite 5 RGB case with 3 RGB fans included, because it wouldn't be a complete system in 2017 if it wasn't an RGB system. RGB glass on the side, exhaust fan on the back, very nice case. To cool our awesome CPU, we have the best deal in a 120mm liquid cooler on the market. The Master Liquid 120 Lite 120mm liquid cooler, under $50. Great value for the money. Everything that you see here is linked down in the video description below to both Amazon and Newegg. I encourage you to price shop and compare prices and buy it where it makes the most sense for you. You will also find linked down there my Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon accounts if you're interested in following me or contributing there. And now, on to the build. And welcome to the top-down view. You can see all the parts laid out on the desk. We have got our video card, our motherboard, RAM, solid-state drive, the case behind here, the liquid cooler, hard drive, power supply, and the Ryzen 5 1600X CPU, the centerpiece of our wonderful build. First things first, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of the case. I will take all of these items off, and we are going to show you some features of this awesome case. Here you can see inside the Cooler Master MasterBox Lite 5 RGB case. I've mentioned before how much I like the MasterBox series. This is a lot of value for the money. There is room in here for a full-size ATX motherboard. You can also install ITX and mini ITX boards in here. There is a mounting plate right here for a 2.5-inch solid-state drive. It just comes off with this thumb screw to give you a convenient mounting point. There is a 120mm exhaust fan installed here in the back, and there are 3 120mm RGB intake fans. Now, this case is also available in a non-RGB version. Now, it's not going to have the RGB fans in the front, but it's a little bit less expensive. Both versions will be linked down in the description below. Here you can see the front of the case, and through here you can see barely the actual fans themselves. Now, once we have this turned on, I'm going to turn it on, we'll light them up, and it will look really nice. There is a splitter cable to plug all 3 of these into the 4-pin RGB plug onto an RGB motherboard. So you will need a motherboard, such as the one we're using here, that does have a 4-pin RGB header. You do have the option to further customize the case. If you take a look here, we've got some red and some white insert pieces. This black trim along here can be replaced, and the black trim along the bottom can be taken off, and you can replace it with red trim, white trim, or you can leave the black trim so you can customize this case per your preference. These trim pieces do come with the case. They're inside a box inside, so if you want to customize it, they come with the case. I now have the case turned on its back. You can see we have full access to the back of the motherboard here for installing any type of cooler. There are an excellent set of loops here for cable management all throughout the back. Very nice. There's also several places here to run various cables if you need them. And then there are 2 3.5-inch toolless hard drive bays here for installing hard drives. The 3 terabyte hard drive that we're installing will go into one of these, leaving you expansion to install one more. Here is the back of the case. You can see the exhaust for the 120mm fan. Now we are going to remove that to install our 120mm liquid cooler. Here is where the video cards go. I want to show you this depth here. This case is wide enough to handle large oversized graphics cards. If you want to install something with 2 or 3 large oversized fans, there is enough Z height in this case to handle it. And then the place for the power supply in the bottom. I have now taken the case off the desk. We are going to install our CPU and our NVMe solid state drive. First things first, the CPU. Here is our ZIF socket, zero insertion force socket. The first thing you're going to need to do is to lift this lever up in order to be able to access the CPU socket. Once we put the CPU down, we simply lower it in place, and that's all it takes to install our CPU. Please be very careful when you take the CPU out of the packaging. The pins are on the bottom of the CPU, and if any of them get bent or damaged, you don't have much of a CPU anymore. So do be extra careful with that. Do be sure to save this plastic. If you ever need to take out the CPU, upgrade, ship it, or anything else, you absolutely need this, so be sure to save that. Now, when it comes to the pins, one is not like the other. One corner has this little golden triangle on it. And if you look at the board, there's a triangle on there as well with a cutout. So the CPU can only go in one way. Don't accidentally insert it the other way because each of the corners has an extra pin on the corner and one is missing. This does not have to be pushed down in place. When you set the CPU down, if it's in the correct place, it just drops right into the holes. That's what this lever is for. It's a zero insertion force socket. You can lift it up and you can set it down. There is no resistance there whatsoever. You can see it doesn't move around, it doesn't slide, it just sits there. Once the CPU is actually in place, then you simply push down on the lever and the CPU is now successfully installed. There's nothing else you have to do with that. Now, these two are the older AM3 style cooling clips. Some coolers will require you to actually unscrew these 4 screws right here and physically remove these. If you buy a Ryzen 5 1600 instead of a 1600X, it comes with the AMD Wraithspire cooler. All you would do is unscrew these 4 screws, take these 2 pieces of plastic physically off the board. The screw holes down there, the cooler, the Wraithspire, plugs directly into and just screws into place. The older style coolers that clip onto the AM3 style clips, you will keep these. The liquid cooler that we're installing has its own mounting mechanism, but just be aware that each cooler is going to have some different kind of cooling mount. It's either going to mount to these clips or you'll have to remove these and screw it into the board. The next thing we're going to do is install our NVMe solid state drive into the M.2 slot that is right here. There is a screw and post that comes with the board. Every board comes with one. You'll need to remove the screw that's on the end of it, but leave the post in place, and we'll use that screw to attach the drive onto the board. I have to give ADATA some credit here. This is some pretty cool XPG packaging, and that's a pretty sweet looking heatsink right there. Most of the M.2 solid state drives are just a couple of chips and a sticker. This actually has a pretty wicked heatsink on it. Now here you can see our drive out of the packaging. You can see the golden fingers on this end and the place where we're going to screw it in on this end. If you're curious and you flip it over, it looks like a standard drive. You can see a sticker and the chips and whatnot, but you are going to install it in this configuration. You will need a small screwdriver. A standard number 2 Phillips head is not going to do it. But as far as installing it goes, it's as simple as undoing this one little screw. You put the drive at an angle. It doesn't go straight in and it doesn't go flat. It goes in at about a 30-degree angle. No force is required. It just works its way in. It sticks up here in the air. Simply hold it down. It'll pop back up. Simply hold it down. Make sure it's lined up with the screw hole. Take your screw and screw it into place just like that. That's not now going anywhere. One of the things I like about this B350 motherboard from BioStar is notice that the M.2 slot is above the graphics card. When we put the graphics card in, it hangs down below the slot. So this does have a heatsink on it, which is nice. It protects it from the graphics card, but many motherboards put this below the graphics slot. I like this positioning. It's very good. Our preparation work with this board is now complete. Don't install your RAM until the system is actually in. It's one of the last things you're going to put in, and we're not going to do anything with the cooler at the moment. So now it's time to put the case back on the desk and put the motherboard in. One of the first things that we want to put in the case is the I/O shield. The I/O shield goes in the slot in the back of the board, and it's what protects all of your inputs. Please note that some I/O shields, in this one in particular, have these circle punches that need to be punched out. So if you want to use the built-in video ports or you want to use the built-in sound ports, be sure to knock out these holes before you install it. What I'm holding here are two cables that came with the case. This one here is a power splitter. This converts a 4-pin Molex connector to the power connectors required for the 3 front fans. So if you have a motherboard that doesn't have enough extra fan headers, you can use this to power those fans. This is the RGB splitter. On this end, we have 3 RGB connectors to connect to the fans, and on this end, we have one that goes in the motherboard. Now, this has 4 pins sticking out of it. Some motherboards want this inserted with the 4 pins, and some motherboards have the 4 pins sticking out. To remove this, you'll need something like a pair of needle nose pliers, and this simply pulls straight out just like that, and then you can plug it into the motherboard, which is what we're going to do because our motherboard has the 4 pins sticking out of the board. We have a large collection of zip ties. All of these came with the case. Use them for your cable management. Finally, we have a large collection of screws down here which are going to be needed to mount this and other devices to the system. You're going to need to look for each of the mounting holes on your motherboard, and different motherboards will use different mounting points. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we need to match those 10 up to the 10 points in here. There are already some pre-installed posts. You can see one here. There's one up here you probably can't see, but none of the others are installed. So you will need to take these and actually install them where they're needed in the case. All of the posts for our motherboard are now installed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'll be honest with you, these were not easy to install. I did have to use my needle nose pliers on them. It would have been actually much easier and faster with the socket wrench. They were a challenge. So take your time, be patient with it. A wrench or a socket wrench would definitely be very helpful installing these posts because they did not want to go in with finger pressure. At this point, you take your motherboard, line up the back panel with the I/O shield, make sure this cable is not in the way. Be aware that it can't go straight and flat. It's going to have to go in at a bit of an angle. I/O shield first. You're going to want to look on the back panel and line these holes up as you're pushing it in, and then set the board down. You don't want to scrape the bottom of the board on these posts. You want to have it elevated up a bit, put these in, and then go straight down. This is where a magnetic screwdriver comes in really handy. Hopefully the camera can see that. Now these are the screws that come with the case, and they're what's going to mount the board to the case. So having this makes this a one-person job. Otherwise it can be a bit challenging because when you stick it in, it's not going to want to stay there until you put one screw in. I'm going to start by doing the center screw here, and that will hold the board in place. Then I'll shift it around, make sure they're all lined up, and then we'll put our screws in. So with the board installed, we take our screwdriver, that's why the magnetic is so nice, and we line it up with the one hole. And I'm not tightening it hard, I'm just putting it in place to hold the board down. Now I'm going to put the other 9 screws in place. And so now with all 10 screws in place, I'm going to go around and tighten each one in turn. I didn't tighten them all the way when I was putting them in to make sure that everything lined up and I could get the screws into each place. Next up, we have our power supply, Cooler Master MasterWatt 450 semi-modular power supply. Now the cool thing about this case is that it actually mounts from the back. This tray comes off, so I'm going to turn the case up so you can see that. Here you can see the back of the case. You can see that we've got 2 thumb screws right here. If you undo these thumb screws, you'll see this back panel actually comes off, and then we have a hole here. You're actually going to screw this onto the power supply. You can see the 4 holes right here, and then you'll put this entire thing with the power supply back into this back hole. So it does not install from the front or the side, it installs from the back. With the back plate successfully screwed onto our power supply, we'll simply run these cables in here, and I will just hold them in the back for a second. And the whole unit just slides straight into place. You may need to use a screwdriver to screw these in. Power supply installed. Now we have the case turned on its back. You can see the motherboard here. This is the back plate which reinforces those clips that'll be used for different types of coolers. You can see all of our cable management here, and then you can see our power supply installed. Now these are the 2 main cables which you have to use anyway. One is a 8-pin CPU power connector, and the other is a 24-pin ATX connector, which we can run and tie off using these zip ties, run through this hole, and plug into the motherboard. I have now put 4 zip ties along here to manage this cable. You don't want any of these cables to come over here and touch the back of the motherboard, especially at the top where the voltage regulators are or here where the RAM modules are. These can melt. So I've tied it off here. It's not going anywhere. clippers or scissors are very handy to make sure that we cut off the excess so that there's nothing flopping around back here. And now we've tied off the main 24-pin ATX cable and cut off the excess there. I am now going to run some additional cables. This is our PCI Express power connector, which we plug in back here, and I'm going to run through here for our video card. And I'm also going to run the SATA cable and the Molex connector cable to power the front fans. Here you can see the front panel connectors. We have the USB 3 connectors, we have a HD audio connector, and then we have the power switch, reset switch, etc. I have actually disconnected them from the front 3 RGB fans because I'm going to tie them up and run them separately. These cables we're simply going to run through the middle, and then I'll connect them in a minute to the other side. Hopefully you can see here what I have done. I have taken the 3 power cables from the 3 front RGB fans and connected them to the splitter that is provided with the case. I have then connected that 4-pin connector to this cable, which is plugged into the power supply. This cable that comes with the power supply has 1 floppy connector, 2 4-pin Molex, and 2 15-pin SATA power connectors. I'm going to use this same SATA power connector to power the hard drive. In fact, because there's 2 of them here, you can plug 2 hard drives in and use this 1 cable. Now, the power supply does come with an extra power cable with 4 more SATA connectors, but this case doesn't really have a place to use it, so this may never actually get used. We'll just use this 1 cable for everything. The next thing we need to do is take that 3 RGB splitter connector that I showed you earlier in the video, and we need to plug all the 3 front fans into each of these. This will be routed to the front of the board. That's actually down here on the board, and we'll plug that in on the other side. Since we're here, we might as well go ahead and install our SATA data cable. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the hard drive. Here is the 3 terabyte hard drive I'm going to put into here. These are toolless trays, and we'll put a data cable in it and run it through here and plug one of the power cables in. We interrupt our regularly scheduled program to show you something that is awesome. I have never seen this before. If other cases have it, I have yet to come across it. The toolless tray actually expands. This is normally this size, and usually you have to bend the heck out of these to try to shove it in there, and it is a pain. This is really nice. Push this down and it slides right out. Drop the drive into place without having to bend anything. Well, not by much. There we go. And then it simply clips back. That is the best designed toolless tray I personally have ever come across. 2 thumbs up to Cooler Master for that toolless tray. All we do at this point is take the drive and put it into the slot, and it simply locks right into place. I now have the power and the data plugged into the drive, and I have this big mess of cables. Unfortunately, there's not much to be done about it. There's several paths you can go here. You can try to string it back and forth and tie it back here. You can shove it into the open drive bay. You can try to shove it here. But regardless of where you put it, it's basically a big tangled mess. Thankfully, there is a cover on the other side of this lower bay, so this hard drive, these cables, and the power supply do not show through to the other side. So if you simply want to shove it all down here, then it's not going to show through so long as it stays down in this area. I now have this awful cabled mess shoved down here in these 2 spots. If you do want to add a hard drive here, you're going to have to change this around. I would like to point something out. If you get the non-RGB version of this case, 2 things change. First of all, half of these cables go away because you don't need this RGB cable here, you don't need this splitter, etc. And it costs $30 less. So how much do you want the RGB? That's a personal choice. We'll look at how beautiful that is later, but you do get rid of some of these cables if you don't need the RGB. And with all the cables tied off and in place, it is time to put the back cover on. Now, turning the case over, you can see we have a lot of cables to plug in. The 24-pin ATX cable will go here. The CPU power connector, which you really can't see, is way up here in the corner. We have our front panel audio, USB, the SATA connector. I'm going to plug all of these in and then point them out to you again. And here we are with all of our cables plugged in. 24-pin ATX power cable plugged in, 8-pin CPU power cable, front panel audio, USB 3, the RGB plug is plugged in, the front panel headers are down here. They're really hard to see, but they are. And then our hard drive, our 3 terabyte hard drive is plugged in here. The boot drive, the NVMe XPG drive is plugged right here. The only thing left to do at this point is install the liquid cooler, put the graphics card in, and install the RAM. Notice I've removed the fan. That's because the liquid cooler comes with its own fan. So if you're installing a liquid cooler, take that out. It's just 4 screws in the back. Now, if you build this system yourself and you go with a Ryzen 5 1600 rather than a 1600X, then you wouldn't take that fan out, leave it in place, and then you would just undo these 4 screws and install the Wraith Spire directly into place. Here you can see the joyful instructions of installing a liquid cooler. Looks complicated, doesn't it? Well, not to worry, this is actually easy. Because we are using an AM4 platform, what this comes with are these 2 clips right here, which will clip onto the water block. These will clip onto these 2 plastic clips, the AM3 mount. There is no need to put a separate backplate. There's no need to put bolt through holes or do anything else. In some respects, installing this Master Liquid Lite 120 is easier on an AM4 board than anything else you could put this on. First things first, we're going to take the thermal compound that comes with our cooler, take the cap off, and we're going to put a small rice grain worth of thermal paste, maybe 2 rice grains. There is enough thermal paste in this tube for anywhere between 4 to 6 applications depending upon how much you use. So if you upgrade your CPU or move this to a new machine, it comes with extra. Most coolers don't. They come with pre-applied thermal paste but no extra, so that's a nice feature. I now have the clips installed to either side of the water block. This right here is what is going to clip onto the side of our mount. Now, as far as the radiator goes, you can see I've actually put the fan here. This is the fan that came with the liquid cooler. Now, there are screws that go all the way through from the back, stick out, and will actually screw into these spots on the radiator right here. The challenge is to hold this in place while screwing them in and not having the water block crash into everything. It is sort of it's a challenge of manual dexterity. And now here I am just screwing the radiator into place. This is set up in an exhaust configuration because we have 3 intake fans. 3 intake fans, 1 exhaust fan. We're going to have a lot of positive pressure inside the case. Now the challenge to mounting this is once you press your cooler down on the CPU, you don't want to lift it up again and risk introducing air bubbles in between the actual 2 surfaces. You want that thermal paste to smooth out nice and smoothly, and then basically you want to hold it into place and then you want to screw these down. Make sure that you've given yourself enough room here. These unscrew, not too far though. We now have the pump head in place. All the hard stuff has been done. Do make sure to plug in your pump head power connector and your fan connector onto the motherboard. Now some people may ask, a 120mm RGB fan comes with this BioStar motherboard. If you buy this motherboard, why not use this RGB fan with the liquid cooler? You could. But please note that liquid coolers come with pressure fans, not airflow fans. This is almost certainly an airflow fan. It's not designed to put pressure through a radiator that is constricted, whereas this fan is. So you can certainly use the RGB fan that comes with the motherboard, but you may very well get lower cooling performance. Whether you care or not is a separate matter, but I'm going to put the one that it came with for the best cooling performance. Now you do have another option with this. There are mount holes on both sides of the radiator, and the liquid cooler does come with 2 sets of these screws. You absolutely could install this on this side, or actually you'd put it on this side, and you can put the pressure fan on this side. So you could absolutely do a push-pull configuration using 1 airflow fan and 1 static pressure fan if you'd like to double up the fans. You will increase your fan noise in doing so. How much overclocking and how much heat do you need to get rid of? That's up to you. For Ryzen processors, I think 1 fan is plenty. If this were an Intel i7 7700K, then I would put both fans in. It is now time to install our beautiful Spectrix D40 RGB RAM from ADATA. That is pretty good looking RAM, and it matches the SSD, which is pretty nice. Now to install DDR4 RAM, please make a note that there's a notch in the middle, but it's not in the center. The RAM only goes in one way. If you look on the board, you'll see there's a cutout there, and we want the smaller area down towards the bottom. I recommend, and most motherboards are going to recommend, installing the RAM on the slots furthest away from the CPU. Just simply make sure these tabs are open, take the RAM goes straight down and straight back out. It does not go in at an angle at all. And it just clicks into place. We take our second module, we line it up with the 2 notches on the sides of the PCB, and it clicks into place. That's all there is to it. Our RAM is installed.
Graphics card time, our Asus Strix Gaming RX 570. Awesome 1080p gaming card. Here you can see our graphics card. We have a single 8-pin PCI Express power connector required, and then it's a dual slot card, so we need to remove 2 of the back panel blocks in order to install the card. With those removed, make sure you push down on this tab. It pops up when the card's installed. It pops down before you do it. So push that down manually. You'll line the card up vertically and insert it straight in. And there's enough clearance here to simply come straight down. Line it up with the slot and simply push straight down. The tab popped up, the card's in, we just screw it in and put the PCI Express power cable in. And there we go, we have our 8-pin PCI Express power cable plugged in. I routed it through this extra hole here just to make it look a little bit nicer. Screws are in place, RAM is installed, liquid cooler's installed, our SSD, our CPU, the motherboard, the power supply, the hard drive is in. This computer is ready to go.
And our system build is now complete. Now in an upcoming video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each of the parts that I put in here and my thoughts on them, as well as provide you with some alternative suggestions. A good simple example of this is the RGB version of the Cooler Master MasterBox Lite 5. You can save about $30 and skip the RGB lights if you don't care about them, and you get basically the same case. There's a variety of little things you can do to change this to make this your own. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, check out the video description because that's where it's all at. The link to enter the giveaway for this computer will be down there. The link to all the parts on Amazon and Newegg will be down there as well as my Twitch, Twitter, and Patreon links will be down there. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.